If you clicked on this video, I know exactly what's going on. You've already mastered the basics of grind survivors, but now the hordes are relentless. And that defeat screen in the final minutes of your run is testing your patience. Believe me, I've been exactly there. That's why today I've put together 10 advanced tips that will completely change the way you play. So get comfortable and let's get straight to the point, because your next run is going to be very different. When we start playing, it's very easy to fall into the trap of focusing solely on damage right out of the gate. I made this exact mistake in my early attempts and suffered quite a bit when the enemy waves started getting more intense. But the truth is, the real secret to mastering this game lies in a slightly different strategy, focusing all your initial attention on the greed skill tree. It might seem counterintuitive to ignore your firepower a bit in the first few minutes, but I guarantee this choice completely changes the course of your match. The magic of the greed tree happens because it solves the biggest problem of the early game, which is how slow it is to level up. By prioritizing these upgrades, you gain an absurd boost in experience gain and greatly expand your pickup radius. For me, there's nothing more frustrating than seeing a sea of resources and gems on the ground and having to risk the character's life just to get close enough to grab them. With a high pickup radius, you suck everything up almost like a magnet, which drastically speeds up your progression without putting you in unnecessarily risky situations. This rapid level gain creates an absolutely wonderful snowball effect for your run. Because you're absorbing resources and experience much faster than normal, you can unlock and assemble your most powerful builds long before the game actually tries to punish you. When those giant waves of enemies and tougher challenges finally appear on screen, you aren't just fighting to survive, you are already dominating the arena with a combination of skills that would normally take twice as long to get. So my personal recommendation for you is to test this approach as soon as you open the game again. Invest those first points in the greed tree, secure that strong resource economy, and trust that the destructive damage will naturally follow as a consequence of your high level. It's one of those strategies that transforms the experience and takes away all that heavy early grind. Give it a try and see how the transition from the early to mid game becomes incredibly smoother and more fun. You know that moment between one run and the next, when you go to the menu just to breathe and take a look at your inventory? It took me a while to realize that the Forge screen isn't just a place to organize leftovers, but where the true progression of grind survivors actually happens. Many players throw away excellent runs simply because they don't master the fusion system. And I guarantee that understanding this mechanic will turn your firepower from water to wine. The mechanic requires a bit of patience and planning, but the process is brilliant. The secret is learning to keep and manage your gear instead of discarding everything. When you access the Forge and select your main weapon, you need to fuse 4 other weapons that are strictly identical to it. We're talking about using pieces of the same type, the same color, and the same rarity. I know the inventory can get messy, but hoarding these exact copies is your passport to the late game. What makes sacrificing these 4 weapons worth every second of your time is the result of this process. When the fusion is complete, your main weapon doesn't just get a visual upgrade and jump in rarity, it absorbs the absolute best of all that material. Your new weapon inherits the best attributes and affixes from the original pieces, creating an optimized and absurdly strong version. It's almost as if you are sculpting the perfect gear for your build. And there's one main reason you should make a habit of always doing this. Relying on luck to find amazing gear on the ground during a match is asking for frustration. But this meticulous fusion in the Forge is the main and safest way to get your hands on those coveted legendary items. If you want that devastating damage to clear the screen in the advanced stages, start stockpiling your weapons and use the Forge strategically right from the start. When you're in the middle of the chaos, surviving seems almost impossible if you just stand still and shoot. It was after playing for hours that I noticed a detail that completely changes the course of the match. The upgrade zones. These spots aren't just random bonuses thrown onto the map, they are the heart of your survival strategy. If you truly want to go far, you need to stop playing defensively and start actively hunting these areas. The first thing you'll notice is that these zones are color-coded, indicating the rarity of the upgrade waiting for you there. This means that camping in a single corner of the screen is the worst choice you can make. The game wants you to move constantly, taking risks across the environment to find the best opportunities. I guarantee that this aggressive exploration makes all the difference when the map starts filling up with monsters. Now comes the real challenge, and where most players panic. When you find a high rarity zone, the time required to activate the bonus is much longer. In those seconds that feel endless, you are left exposed, needing to dodge and survive in a tight space while the capture process completes. It's a test of patience and skill that gets your heart racing, as any slip up can cost you your run. But the reward is worth every second of tension. The moment you finally complete the activation of that high-level zone, the game releases a massive shockwave that pushes back and blows away all surrounding enemies. It's an absurd feeling of relief that not only hands you a powerful upgrade, but also clears the screen so you can breathe and plan your next move. Use this explosion intentionally to save yourself when cornered, and you'll dominate the game with ease. When I picked up the revolver for the first time in Grind Survivors, I confess I almost swapped it for a machine gun right away. Its fire rate is pretty slow, and when the screen starts filling with monsters from all sides, you get that natural despair that you won't be able to clear the horde in time. But I stuck with the weapon a little longer and realized its true potential was hidden in how you choose its upgrades. The big secret I discovered for turning these slower weapons into absolute machines of destruction is focusing on a very specific combination of attributes: Pierce and Ricochet. If you take these two skills separately, they do an okay job, but when you put them together in the same evolution sequence, your survival dynamic changes absurdly. Think about how this works in practice. You fire a single heavy shot that pierces through 3 or 4 enemies at once because of the pierce attribute. But instead of that bullet simply disappearing off screen, the ricochet effect makes it bounce back and tear through the horde all over again. That single slow shot you fired ends up hitting a dozen monsters, multiplying your damage in a way no fast-firing weapon ever could. This brilliant synergy simply makes you forget any disadvantage related to the revolver's attack speed. You stop worrying about shooting fast and start focusing solely on moving well so that each bullet does the maximum possible damage to the crowd. It is undoubtedly one of the most satisfying character builds I've tested in the game, and it has become vital for me whenever I need to clear those dense late-game hordes. One of the most tempting mechanics you'll find in Grind Survivors is the Forge system. When I started playing and saw that I could use the ashes I'd sweated so hard to collect to increase my weapon damage, my first reaction was to spend it all immediately. It seems like the most logical decision to try and survive the early hordes and gain a quick advantage, but believe me, this is a massive trap that can ruin your run later on. The big problem here is how the game manages the risk of this upgrade system. In the first few levels, everything is smooth sailing, and success is almost guaranteed. However, as you try to make your weapon stronger, the chance of failure increases brutally. And the worst part isn't just the failure itself, but the fact that you lose the weapon's progress. It's a horrible feeling to invest your hard-earned resources and end up with weaker gear than when you started the process. It was after failing a few times and losing good runs that I completely changed my strategy. The golden rule I adopt now is to hold back the anxiety and hoard absolutely all my ashes in the early game. Spending this valuable resource on low-level or even mid-tier weapons simply isn't worth the risk of losing it all later. Your initial goal should just be to survive and gather as many ashes as possible without even looking at the forge. The magic happens when you finally get your hands on an epic or higher tier weapon. That is exactly the moment you should unload all those accumulated ashes. Since epic and legendary weapons already have a much higher base damage, every successful upgrade has a gigantic impact on the game. Having the patience to save resources early on ensures that when the game gets truly insane in the final waves, you'll have the absolute firepower to destroy everything on the map. When you pick up the shotgun in Grind Survivors for the first time, the temptation to turn it into a scatter cannon is huge. I made this mistake myself in my very first few runs, going straight for the extra bullets upgrade, thinking I was going to sweep the map. But reality hits hard when you realize that this upgrade actually dilutes the damage of each pellet. Instead of obliterating enemies that get close, you end up just tickling the tougher hordes that show up later in the game. It was while racking my brain to make this weapon work that I discovered where its true gold lies. The strategy that completely changed how I play was to ignore the bullet count and focus 100% on reload speed. The shotgun already hits very hard naturally if you keep the original damage concentrated, so your only real obstacle is that dangerous downtime when your character stops to load more ammo. Speed that up and you fix the weapon's biggest flaw. But the real magic of this tip kicks in when you start abusing the fact that the shotgun's magazine is tiny. Since you're going to spend the whole match reloading nonstop, the absolute secret is to hunt for passive skills that trigger special effects exactly at the moment of reloading. My absolute favorite combination is mixing this high speed with the passive that calls down lightning strikes on enemies every time the weapon is fed fresh ammo. The practical result of this build on your screen is a wonderful sight to behold and almost feels unfair to the game. You fire a devastating point-blank shot, and in a fraction of a second, you're already reloading, which summons a lightning storm that melts everything out of your reach. Basically, you turn a weapon that would only be short range into a true screen-clearing machine. Test this synergy in your next round, and see how much easier it becomes to survive the chaos. One of the easiest skills to overlook amidst that shower of level up options in Grind Survivors is Hungry Bullets. When I first saw this name, I thought it was just another standard lifesteal option and almost skipped it, but I decided to give it a chance out of pure curiosity and ended up stumbling upon one of the most absurd mechanics the game has to offer. If you know how to exploit this power, your run will turn into total chaos in your favor. To understand the impact of this, think about how weapons normally work. You shoot, and the projectile travels for a short time or a specific distance before simply disappearing into thin air. What this skill does is devour the enemy's life force to keep your ammo active on the screen. Every time your bullet hits a monster, its duration timer is completely refreshed, giving an immediate extension to your attack. Now imagine pairing this extension with a character build totally focused on ricochet. This is exactly where the true magic of Grind Survivors happens, and you stop playing defensively. As your shot pierces and bounces from one enemy to the next, every impact resets that bullet's disappearance timer. Instead of firing a shot that hits 3 targets and vanishes, you create a persistent projectile that keeps bouncing through the crowd endlessly. The visual result of this combination is a screen infested with hungry bullets that literally refuse to die. You fire just a few times, and suddenly the whole map becomes a death trap full of projectiles circling and hunting down enemies. It's an indescribable feeling of power to see giant hordes melting on their own because your ammo just keeps clearing the area autonomously. Build your character with this synergy in mind and watch how reaching the end of the match becomes a much smoother task. One of the things that took me the longest to understand in Grind Survivors was that the game completely changes its personality at higher difficulty levels. In the early waves, you stop, collect the XP dropped on the ground, level up, and move on without major consequences. But when things get truly tight and projectiles start coming from every angle, taking 2 steps in the wrong direction to grab XP can be exactly what gets you killed. I learned this the hard way, in runs that were looking beautiful and ended ridiculously because of an item on the ground. The solution that completely changed my survivability in the advanced stages was one of the simplest and most ignored in the entire game. Increasing pickup range should be at the absolute top of any serious player's priority list. This attribute seems modest and invisible when you're looking at so many aggressive damage and speed options, but its impact on your mobility is something you feel immediately in practice. Think about what this upgrade represents amid the chaos of a late wave. Instead of having to physically move to each XP crystal dropped in a dangerous corner of the map, your suction area starts pulling everything in automatically while you're dodging projectiles. You keep leveling up your character at a steady pace without taking a single unnecessary risk. It is the perfect definition of doing more with less effort. The competitive edge this gives you in the long run is absurd. Characters with a high pickup range reach higher evolution levels faster than other players, precisely because they never stop moving to grab XP. While everyone else is dancing around drops or taking damage to collect them, you are passively leveling up and accumulating that extra power that will make all the difference when facing the final hordes. If you want to survive the hardest modes, stop underestimating this attribute and treat it as a real priority from the start. Reaching the endgame of Grind Survivors is a huge achievement, but the game makes a point of letting you know the party has barely started. When you hit that point, the rules that worked before simply stop making sense. I jumped into endless mode thinking my build was powerful enough to handle anything, and the game made sure to prove me wrong in the very first few waves. That's when I realized that surviving the infinite scaling requires a completely different mindset from everything you've learned so far. The mistake that destroys most builds in this advanced stage is trying to balance multiple damage sources at once. When enemies start scaling to absurd health and resistance numbers, having 5 average damage sources is worth way less than having a single source of total destruction. The right play is to pick one element early on. Fire or poison are my personal favorites, and build absolutely everything around that choice without looking sideways. And here is the technical detail that separates those who survive from those who die in endless mode. You need to focus your upgrades exclusively on percentage bonuses to total damage, not flat damage bonuses. A flat bonus of plus 100 damage sounds great early on, but when your fire is already dealing 50k per second, that number changes nothing. A 15% bonus on total damage, however, scales along with your growing power and gets more absurd with every passing level. Once you truly understand this, endless mode stops being a nightmare and becomes a playground. Your chosen damage source begins to grow exponentially because every new percentage upgrade multiplies a number that is already giant. I've seen runs where poison alone was wiping out entire waves before the enemies even got close to me. Pick a path, be fanatic about it, and watch your character evolve into something the game can barely keep up with. One of the most frustrating situations you will experience in Grind Survivors is when the game finally hands you a legendary weapon and its attributes are complete garbage. I've been through this several times, holding a legendary shotgun with affixes that didn't match my build in the slightest, feeling trapped in a terrible choice. It was in that moment I discovered the Reforged system, and it became one of the most powerful tools I have in my arsenal outside of direct combat. What Reforged basically does is reset all of your weapons' attributes and roll new affixes in their place. Think of it as giving a second life to an item that had all the potential in the world, but arrived in your hands poorly configured. You can turn that mediocre legendary into a perfect piece for your build, without having to pray the game drops another copy of the same weapon with better stats. It's a level of control over your gear that makes an absurd difference in long runs. The detail you need to memorize before you go using this system on everything is that the cost of each attempt increases progressively. The first time is cheap, the second already weighs heavier, and if you keep pushing your luck in a row, you'll burn through your resources at a terrifying speed. I've made the mistake of repeatedly reforging a mid-tier weapon just to see what would happen, and I ended up going into a run entirely out of resources for what really mattered. The rule I adopted and never broke again is to use Reforge exclusively on legendary weapons that I've already decided to carry to the very end of the match. If you aren't absolutely sure that this weapon is part of your ideal long-term build, hold on to your resources and wait. When the right moment comes and you have that perfect legendary with bad stats, that's when you use the system without hesitation and turn your character into something the game simply cannot stop.
Over and over and over and over again. Why should I repeat myself? Why should I repeat myself? Why should I repeat